Welcome to Successful Parenting, where we, Jackie Rue and Robin Choquette, share practical skills for families to build resilience and healthy connections. As practicing professionals and parents ourselves, we hope this podcast is a resource for parents to grow, reflect, and learn more about themselves and their children. Our approach is simple, tangible, and most importantly, we lead with compassion for the integrity of the families we serve. This podcast should not be taken as medical advice and is intended for informational purposes only. We love our work, and we can't wait to watch families gain confidence and open themselves up to new ways of successful parenting. Hey, Jackie.
Hello, Robin. How are you?
I'm good. Do you know what? You inspired me. I have reached out this week to a golf course and I'm looking to take some golf lessons. I did it last year and they never returned my phone call and I never made it a priority. But given I know that you've really been working on taking some time away and stepping away, I got to do that too. So thank you for being an inspiration, even though you did not know.
That is awesome. And my husband, Steve, says he is going to be doing the same. So you and Steve can golf together.
Yay! I love Steve. He's great.
Yes. I find the sport to be a little slow, but I am going to be taking some tennis lessons. For whatever reason, golf is not my thing, but I will sit on the cart and cheer you both on.
Good. Have you tried pickleball? Everybody's talking about it.
I have not tried that, Robin. I will get to that. I'm still holding on to my running career.
Yeah. You're younger, so my age is looking at
not by much. But I'm excited about our topic today, and I am excited about our guest speaker who is reflecting on my early years when I worked in a school and when I was super young and super excited to work with the families. I am one that can be a little bit too eager and too excited. And I remember I had a student and he was an amazing young man. He's 14 and I still run into him sometimes today. And he's, well into his adulthood. I remember he was one of those kids that really would give you a run for your money, right? He would scream and yell. And I remember one day he was in my office for 6 hours screaming and yelling and people would come by and, are you okay? Are you okay? And I remember there was a day where I was just exhausted and I was not at my best and he was just ramping it up. And one of the things I remembered is I was getting really, really frustrated. I was getting angry. I feel like I had tried everything that day. And as I started to get frustrated and just react, he started to ramp up and get more and more frustrated. And it was interesting. The more frustrated I got, the more frustrated he got. One of my fellow staff that came in the room and they had just this calm demeanor. And I took a step back and I really learned from this person. As they calmed down, it brought my level down and it brought the student down. And it was something that has always stayed with me. And the reason I share this story is because our speaker today is Doug Bolton, and he is just that calm presence. He really brings calm to the room. And I had learned about him early on when I was first starting out at a therapeutic day school. And he is a clinical psychologist. He's also the director of school consultation for formative psychological services. Where I knew him as he spent over 20 years as a psychologist and a principal for a highly recognized therapeutic day school in our area, North Shore Academy, which is a K through 12 therapeutic school. And that school was known for engaging some of the most difficult children and students in terms of school engagement and school refusal. And as you know, that's a passion of ours.
Right. Yes.
They would go to the nth degree to really engage children and families. He provides consultation and professional development to schools all over Illinois. And I know he's starting to even branch out beyond that. And everyone that hears him just talks about how not only do they feel better about themselves as a result, but they also learn more about fostering student and staff resilience. He's in the process of writing a book, which I'm super excited about for parents.
Oh, great.
And I'm just really excited to have him here. So welcome, Dr. Doug Bolton.
Welcome.
Thank you so much. What a nice introduction. I'm a little speechless. Thank you. And I loved your story, Jackie, about you with that student and the power of a calm presence in the midst of emotional hurricane. That was a great way to begin.
Doug, you wear many hats, clinical psychologist, you've been a principal at North Shore, and I will tell you, one of my favorite schools. Thank you for all the work there. You're in private practice, you're writing a book. Sounds like leadership and professional development is huge. What's your favorite part of all of the stuff that you do?
It's a great question. Now that I've left the schools, I loved being in schools because I loved being a part of that community, a community of students and staff. I left North Shore Academy in 2019, and I think I felt a little bit adrift, and then COVID came. And so the thing that I love about my work the most at this point is being able to connect with others to do this important work. It could be connecting with families to help figure out how do we think differently about what's happening in our family. I love working with school districts who want to really dig in and figure out, what can we do differently as a district to be able to create communities of belonging, especially for the kids who are on the fringes of that community, because the costs and the risk for these kids who don't feel connected to their school community is so important. And so watching and feeling the passion of people to say, we want everybody to be included, that's what really energizes me the most.
I like that. My motto is, and I'll be honest, I took it from Michael Gervais, who's a sports psychologist, I become through my relationships. Yeah. And so when you say that, that reminds me of that, my motto that I carry. And I think it is, those connections are so important.
Yeah, I do too. And I think they're the foundation of everything that we do in our families. It's the foundation of what happens in classrooms. It's the foundation of what happens throughout our lives. And it's easy to lose track of that as we strive for achievement or we focus on numbers. But at the very core of all of this is, do I have a sense of belonging? Am I connected to the people around me? Because that opens up and unlocks our brains and our collaborative spirit for the most important and hardest work that we can do.
I love when families start to see that engagement, when they start to see hope, how that just turns things around for them. We were talking earlier, and I know there's a lot of research out there, and there's a lot of talk around trauma-sensitive care and those children and families that have experienced trauma, that they're going to be at greater risks for being able to self-regulate. What are your thoughts on this, and how have you seen that play out?
Well, I think that trauma has a huge impact on what happens for us physiologically, emotionally. The interesting thing, and I know previous guests have talked about the Adverse Childhood Experiences Survey, which and the research on that really was in the early and mid 90s. So we're getting close to 30 years of research, and it's only now coming into our real awareness, I think, as educators and even as clinicians. But what happens with trauma is that our bodies are built to protect ourselves. Our bodies are really built for survival. And one of the ways that we survive is that our brains identify things that could be threats. And then it triggers our stress response system, our fight or flight system. And the tricky part for kids who've experienced trauma, especially at the hands of those who are expected to take care of them, or because it's chronic and it is constantly happening in homes, what happens is that their bodies become hypervigilant to any perceived threat. And in doing so, it triggers their stress response system. So their fight and flight system doesn't get a break. And they walk into school with this fight or flight system highly active. And then they act in ways, because when we're in that place, we lose a lot of the skills we need to be able to sit in class, to be able to focus on our assignments. The system was built for us to run away from grizzly bears. And all the things that we need to run away from grizzly bears are not the things we need to sit and focus in school. And so all of a sudden, these kids start showing up with trauma-based behaviors in school that we then try and punish them out of these behaviors. And what the punishment then does is it just triggers their stress response even more. So not only are they experiencing high levels of stress at home, but all of a sudden they're experiencing high levels of stress at school. And then their stress response never gets a break. Go ahead. Yeah.
A lot of times, Robin and I, work with parents on, creating routine, structure, and expectations where there are, let's say, expectations and privileges. Some would say consequences, but it's done in a very safe, loving, structured way. When you say punishment, I think you're referring to more that reactive, punitive, right? Not more emotionally driven.
Absolutely. The challenge is that in order for our stress response to quiet, there are a couple of things that help us quiet our stress response. One is relationships help quiet our stress response. Another is being in a regulated place. You described how powerful it was for this other person to walk in with this sense of calm. Dysregulation is wildly contagious, and that's what you experienced with that student. They got dysregulated, and then you got dysregulated. But regulation is also remarkably contagious. So when we can have a regulated response to a dysregulated person, it has huge benefits. But what often happens is we get dysregulated and then we do things which further trigger children's dysregulation. And typically, the way we use punishments, there's some level of exclusion and loss that we are implementing in order to try and get child to comply with what we're hoping for. But what we know dysregulates us. There are certain things that dysregulate us. In particular, it's feeling disconnected, feeling disempowered, and feeling devalued. And so when we exclude and punish kids, we are further dysregulating them. And the challenge is, number one, it's so harmful to their long-term physical health, but also it disconnects them from that part of their brain that they need to solve the problem in that moment. And this is where relationship is so important. And I love the way you described this is where structure is so important so that these responses are predictable. This is how we create environments that can help kids who are experiencing trauma to quiet that stress response. The challenge is that the kids with the behavior problems, if you've got zero adverse childhood experiences, right? If you've got low levels of trauma, you're much less likely to be identified for behavior problems in school. But if you've got 4 or more of these chronic stressors, you're 34 times more likely to be identified for learning and behavior problems. And so when we see misbehavior, really what we're seeing is stress behavior. And so what we want to do is try and figure out how can we address the stress instead of exacerbate the stress through exclusion and punishment.
I want to expand on Jackie's last question, your response. What are some of the difficulties that children who've experienced trauma may have?
What happens when we are in that fight or flight state, for lack of a better term, we lose certain things that are really essential for us. In particular, we lose access to our prefrontal cortex, which manages impulse control. It manages our ability to make transitions, our ability to persist, our ability to access empathy, our ability to plan and organize. All of these things are less accessible when we are in what I like to call lower brain. We can't access these things. So it shows up in different ways for different people. For some people who've experienced trauma, it may be avoidance. For other kids who've experienced trauma, it may be more related to impulsivity. It may show up as oppositional behavior after time. Not being able to meet the demands that are being placed on you can be very, very hard, especially when you're in school and you're trying to comply for 6 hours a day and you don't have what it takes because your brain is in lower brain. You don't have the skills that it takes to be successful there. You bring that home to a home where there's a lot of stress and trauma and other people are in lower brain. It's really hard. Your brain never gets a break, and our brains need those breaks in order for us to physically and emotionally cope with the world around us.
That's well said. I wanted to learn more about your model, kind of how you've arrived at it, how you see it impacting schools and communities.
Yeah, there was a moment, I think probably about 10 years ago, when the mental health crisis really in kids really began to spike. My supervisor at the time, Heather Meal, came to me and said, "We want you to present to special educators in at the time it was the NSSED cooperative, about how to support kids and their mental health." And I just thought, can I solve world poverty too? It felt like, what do I have to say about that? Really helped me begin to reflect on what is it that helped us be successful when we were most successful at North Shore Academy. And I began to watch what it was that the most successful people were doing. And at the same time, I was reading some works by Louis Cozolino. He wrote a book called Why Therapy Works. And we were working, Mary Jo Barrett, who's a brilliant clinician, social worker who knows more about trauma than I will ever know. She's had a career in doing that work. And all of a sudden, things began to crystallize that mental health issues are more, there's a lot of complexity, but there's a basis of challenges that people have. And the first is what I realized, there's a combination of our ability to make healthy attachments and our ability to be emotionally regulated. That if we can make healthy attachments and if we can manage stress in a way that's regulated, we do pretty well in life, right? That life comes together and we don't need a ton of extra supports. And when I started thinking about the students at North Shore Academy, or the kids that I had been seeing and families I'd been seeing in private practice, at its basis is our ability to make healthy connections with peers and adults for kids, our healthy connections as adults to be able to have good, strong relationships, and our ability to be emotionally regulated in response to stress. That those are the two things that really rose to the surface. And the thing about trauma is trauma impacts both our ability to be emotionally regulated, our ability to connect. And there's one intervention that actually helps us learn and develop healthy connections. It helps us learn and to be emotionally regulated. And it's the same intervention that helps us, the same basic intervention that helps us address trauma. And that is being embedded in connected and regulated communities. That if we can put people in healthy communities, we all get better and we're all healthier. And the opposite is also true. When we are in toxic communities, we get unhealthier and our behavior shows up very differently and our relationships are really challenged. So that became the focus, is how can we really support helping kids, embedding kids in healthy communities. And the challenge is that when kids behave in trauma-related ways and in ways that are stress-related, then all of a sudden their community becomes they feel much more alienated. They feel much less of a sense of connection. People are dysregulated in response to their dysregulation. And as a result, the impact of trauma, the impact of their own regulation issues, the impact of their own challenges in developing relationships all get exacerbated instead of addressed. So that's the basic idea of how I think about this work.
It's funny, Doug, real quick, we have a saying, and healthy schools produce healthy students. And we always talk about your students are only going to be as healthy as you are as a staff, as a school. And so often, schools will call me in and say, fix the children, fix the students, fix the parents. And I'm like, well, it's not, sometimes it's a product of kind of the overall arching theme. And, if the staff and the isn't healthy and we're not working together kind of for that same vision, like you just described, you really see that kind of trickle down overall to the students and the families. And, we go back to, do our children believe that they're going to be successful in school? And when I ask that question, most staff, I'll get, probably 60 to 70% that will say no. Yeah. And then I typically say, well, if your students don't come to school expecting they can be successful, then we need to start there, right? Because that's going to be the number one predictor of their engagement.
Yeah. One of the questions I often get, from parents asking, what can they do? How can they help their children to emotionally regulate? What suggestions would you give our listeners?
Great question. And this gets to where, Jackie, you just described, is in order to teach regulation, we really need to be regulated ourselves. And so I think that, number one, being regulated is going to help them regulate. They call this co-regulation, that really it's my nervous system telling your nervous system that it's safe, it's okay right now in this moment. And being able to have to be regulated yourself, but that takes some work to be emotionally regulated. And when I get upset, it's to recognize that that's my dysregulation. There are stresses in my life that cause me at different points in time to show up differently, and I need to take care of that first. And kids are watching us. And they learn how to regulate. And right. I love James Baldwin's quote, which is, children have never been very good at listening to their elders, but they have never failed to imitate them, right? And our kids are watching. So it's important that we show and be able to say, I'm noticing that I'm too upset right now to be able to be in this conversation. Let me take a few minutes. Or maybe watch us breathe. Breathing and breath work has incredible impact on our ability to immediately shift the stress hormones in our brains and in our bodies. How can we, when kids struggle, can we see it shifted from misbehavior? They're being manipulative, they're lazy, they're whatever, to stress behavior. And when we see it as stress behavior, then figure out how can we then help them identify what's going on with their stress. And then what are the resources we can do to support them with that? One of the people, I don't hear his name very often, but I think he's so helpful. Stuart Shanker is a psychologist at the University of Toronto, and he wrote a book called Self-Reg that I found so helpful in breaking down this misunderstanding that once we can see kids' misbehavior as stress behavior, it changes. And then it empowers us to figure out how can we understand the stress that our kids are experiencing? How can they notice it themselves? And then what's their strategy? What are the resources they have to deal with that? And we can replace regulation with stress. When they're dysregulated, how can we help them recognize that dysregulation and then be able to help them find resources for that? When you notice your child, early signs of your child struggling with regulation, it might be that their leg starts jiggling. They may have a hard time sitting still. Asking them about what they're feeling, what's happening for them, what does their body feel like, what are they thinking, what would be helpful for them. And then finally, I think one of the things that's so important, and again, I learned this from Mary Jo. Mary Jo and I worked with some teachers from Highland Park following the 4th of July shooting.
You remember I was with you, Doug?
Yes. And we were working with clinicians then, Jackie, and it was powerful, right? And then we went and we also worked with teachers as they were in smaller groups, as they were coming back and anxious about what are we going to do with our kids? What are we going to say? We need the right words. And the thing about trauma is it's not about having the right words. There's no way we can make sense or understand the traumatic events in any of our lives. But what Mary Jo helped me see and understand is that there's a rhythm that's so important for us. There's a rhythm of being able to, we need to pause and catch our breath and have moments of quiet and pause before we can really fully engage in the world. And then we need to pause again, whether it's, sleeping is our pause. We need to sleep at night in order to fully show up the next day. Sports teams have half times and they come together before the game and then they play a half and then they slow down and they pause and they rest before they go out and play the second half and then they pause again. That there's this rhythm that's so important. And one of the things that I think has happened in our lives is we have expanded lives for our kids, but we haven't contracted. We haven't continued to contract. And so all of a sudden we've got kids who are in all these AP classes and they're also on 3 travel teams. And we don't have time as a family to come together over dinner or other times to pause and reflect in the way that we used to. We and our kids are constantly moving. And so what I would say is it's so important to build in these quiet moments to help us reset our regulation baseline before we go off and do this. And it may mean playing on fewer teams. It may mean making dinner time a priority, whatever that looks like, but making sure that kids have moments of pause and contraction so that they can be more fully themselves and expand, and make sure that there's a rhythm so that they know how to calibrate their energy throughout the day and manage their stresses. So those are some of the things that come to mind about what we can do as families to begin to address, to support the development of emotional regulation in our kids.
That's awesome. And I think as you've talked about today, there's so much that, we can do with families just to be part of the healing process. And, one thing that I say a lot is, and this seems to resonate with parents, is just because your child's struggling today is not an indicator of their success for tomorrow. Because I think so often, and I'm a parent myself, so is Robin, we get caught up in, oh my gosh, like we're not doing well, like this is awful, they're not going to be okay. And again, it's going back to, our kids are all going to struggle, and how do we heal together is really the framework that you're talking about today, and helping our families find that, community, find that safety net where they can really start to heal and thrive and develop that resiliency.
Absolutely. I think that what you said is such an important message because it speaks to trusting and understanding development. And I think that we don't do that enough. That one of the challenges, I've got a friend named David Gleason. He's a psychologist in Boston, and he wrote a book called At What Cost, about how do we defend adolescent development in highly competitive schools, something like that. And what he talks about is developmental empathy, that our work is to match what's happening, what we're expecting of kids with where they're at developmentally. And the thing that worries me most about what's happening in our culture now, and I think contributes to the mental health crisis, is that we've continued to raise our expectations for what kids are able to do. And the kids who develop earlier are able to do that easier, right? They're able to make that. My daughter was able, she was organized. She had all of these things. School came easy to her. For my son, it didn't come as easy. And so what happens is that when we have expectations for what kids are able to do and they can't meet them, there's dramatic stress. And the thing is that kids develop at different rates. This prefrontal cortex of theirs isn't fully developed until they're 28. And so
Right.
all of a sudden we've got kids, we don't think twice about watching two kids in middle school and one has facial hair and is 6 feet tall, right? And full of body odor. And the other is still
Right.
3 years away from puberty. We don't say, oh, this one's never going to make puberty. This one, we need to give an incentive program to help them develop facial hair. We'd never do that. They're lazy. They're not, they're not growing fast enough. The same thing is true. Our prefrontal cortex develops at different rates for different kids. And I think a lot of the
Right.
kids who struggle the most are the ones who are just slower to develop. And if we can just be patient and let that brain develop, we can get to a place where, and this is what we found at North Shore Academy, is kids' lives seem like a train wreck at 15, 16, and 17, but all of a sudden they'd come back at age 23, 24, 25, and it's like, oh, they've got their life together. And it wasn't anything magical we did. I think in so many ways, we just held them in a safe place until that brain could catch up to what everybody was demanding of them.
I like that.
Yeah, that's so true. And I think it's helpful. And I think it's sometimes, it's the basic things that we forget about. I think sometimes we try to make things so tricky. And, I think when things get really overwhelming, whether it's in schools or in homes, I think sometimes just going back to the basics, focusing on our own reactions. And I think this has been so helpful. And I'm excited to continue this conversation with you and have you on again, because I think you help so many families and you help so many, educators and administrators in schools that ultimately help communities. So I so appreciate you being on today. And I know Robin has a couple of questions to ask you, but I so appreciate you, Doug.
And I appreciate both of you and the work that you're doing with this podcast and all you're doing for parents and for schools and communities is it's amazing, all the things you're doing. And so just to be a part of this is a real honor.
Oh, thank you. I feel honored to have you here. So here we go. The 3 questions. We ask this to every guest. You may choose to answer 1. You may choose to answer 2 or all 3. It's your choice. Here we go. Number 1, tell us one of your funny parenting stories. It could be about yourself as a parent, or it could be from your childhood and talk about your own family. Number 2, what TV, family, or a movie would you want to be a part of and why? And number 3, what does successful parenting mean to you? 1, 2, or 3, your choice. Take it away, Doug.
All right, I will do number 3. Let's do that. So I think that, well, I'll do a quick number 2. I kept
Okay.
coming back to the TV family. I kept coming back to the to parenthood and the Bravermans. There's such a complex and family with all sorts of wonders and flaws. But the thing I envy the most about them is I always wish that I was in a town with my whole family. We're all across the country, and so that I think so. And I do think that there's real value, and one of the things that's hard for us as a society is to that we're not all together in community with our families anymore.
Right.
And then successful parenting, I think I would say the first thing is take care of yourself first, and take care of your, if you're in a marriage, take care of your marriage first. That comes first. And then your relationship with your child is always going to be the most important driver of this, and stress can get in the way of that. And so I would say, make sure that that the connection, as much as behavior and other things get in the way, make sure that that connection is there. See misbehavior as stress behavior, and then teach them how to regulate. Show them how to regulate by regulating yourself. Believe in development, that this will get easier, that the struggles they have now aren't forever, and just know that they will get easier. And then look at the messages that we're sending to our children. It's interesting. One of the things that they did some research, and they found that when they ask parents, what are the messages you give your kids about what you value the most? They say kindness over achievement. And then they asked the kids, and the kids said, so 90% of parents said, I communicate that I value kindness. And the kids, 82% of the kids said that my parents value achievement over kindness. And I think being careful about the messages that we're sending, what makes us anxious, what makes us happy, what helps us connect. And then finally, I would say we need to pause as families. Together, we need to take pauses and make sure that we're building these pauses, these times of contraction and connection in our families, in our week and in our days together. Those would be the pieces that I think are essential to our successful parenting.
That's awesome. I like it too. Thank you so much. And I am excited that you were on today. And Robin, I hope you have fun with your golf lessons, and hopefully you can improve and get better and have fun. I know the weather here is not quite golf season, but you're in Kansas, so you might have some better luck than we are.
Yes, I will definitely be starting a little earlier. Okay, well, thanks listeners for joining us, and I hope everyone has a great day.
Thank you.
Bye, Jackie. Thank you for joining us, and make sure to subscribe and like us to catch our next episode, where we will take you on a journey to find new ways of successful parenting.